Review for Depth Study C, Russia, 1905 to 1941. The first section is, why did the Tsarist regime collapse in 1917? The focus points: how well did the Tsarist regime deal with the difficulties of ruling Russia up to 1914? So this is going to be a section where you're going to say, oh, Russia is incredibly big. It's difficult to administer such a territory. It was not industrialized, so there were not railroads yet. They were being built under Sergei Witta. There were communications problems between Asian Russia and European Russia because there wasn't any telegraphs or telephone lines yet, and they were being built as well. So it was quite a difficult situation. It was a multi-ethnic society. Russians are actually the minority in the Tsarist Empire. They're about 49% or almost 50%, but ethnic minorities actually outnumber the ethnic Russians. When I say ethnic minorities, I mean Finns. Finland was part of the Russian Empire at this time. Ukrainians, the Baltic states, Uzbeks, Kazakhs, Central Asian countries like that, Caucasian countries like Georgia, Azerbaijan, Armenia. There's a lot of ethnic groups within Russia itself, Tatars, Ingush, all these types of people, Chechens. So it is incredibly diverse, and this is why a policy of Russification is set up by the Tsar, and there's a lot of resistance to that, basically making people get rid of their languages and customs and religions and stuff like that. So there was a lot of resistance and pushback, and it was difficult to govern such a diverse population with these autocratic means. The second bullet point says, how did the Tsar survive the 1905 revolution? In 1905, Russia was exploding because of the modernization campaign that Sergei Witta was undertaking. It exacted a terrible price on the peasantry. The working conditions were terrible. Social revolutionaries, Marxists, they all wanted to overthrow the Tsar. There were nationalists of the different ethnic groups that also didn't want to be part of the Russian Empire. So Nicholas said to himself, oh, why don't I start a war with Japan? We'll take it in 3 days. Well, I'm sorry, that's another Tsar that said that for a different country. But he definitely thought he would wipe the floor with Japan and gain a lot of popularity through this. He was wrong. Japan was no pushover, and they humiliate Russia multiple times. The third one, how far was the Tsar weakened by the First World War? The answer is tremendously. It is his downfall. He goes to the front to see what's going on and provide some morale to the troops, even though he has no modern military background. He's very good at parades and wearing uniforms and stuff like that. But when it comes to going up against the German officer corps, he's no match for that. So we will see him go to the front, leave his wife and Rasputin, who is a very colorful character in Russian history. They're in charge, and they just cause havoc back home. And eventually, by tying his fate to World War I, Russia losing, he will be deposed and eventually killed by the Bolsheviks. Why was the Revolution of March 1917 successful? You'll see all of the aspects of Russian society unite to say this guy is terrible. The workers in St. Petersburg, which is the capital at that time, the peasants in the countryside, the soldiers just start to leave. They desert en masse, letting the Germans just kind of go deeper and deeper into the country. The aristocracy sees that the country is slipping away, so they also start to think of replacing the Tsar. They want to keep the monarchy, but they want to get rid of Nicholas. But the March Revolution is a revolution of the democratic forces in Russia, led by Alexander Kerensky. So Lenin will start to play a role a bit later on. But this first revolution, you have to understand, it doesn't go from the Tsar to the communists. There is a provisional government in between the March Revolution and the October Revolution. I like to use the Russian dates, I'm sorry. So if you're going to go March, you have to say November. But I always say the February Revolution and the October Revolution because the calendar is different between Western calendars and Russian calendars, Gregorian and Julian. So the second section, how did the Bolsheviks gain power and how did they consolidate their rule? First focus point, How effectively did the provisional government rule Russia in 1917? The answer is not well. First things first, they did not take Russia out of the war, or they did not even just play a defensive war. They decided to go on the attack, which was completely idiotic looking back on it, and it led to their downfall. So World War I killed the Tsarist Empire, and the failure of the provisional government to get out of the war or to at least minimize Russia's role led it to a similar fate. Lenin comes back from Switzerland. The Germans shoot him in a secret train, and he's causing havoc from day one. So it's his goal to destroy the provisional government, and he ultimately succeeds. Why were the Bolsheviks able to seize power in November 1917? I want to mention a few names here. Of course, we have Lenin, but we also have Trotsky. You need to know who Trotsky is. He is the brains behind the military takeover of the capital and the installing of the Petrograd Soviet and all of these other types of things. So Trotsky is a tremendously important figure. You need to put him up there with Lenin as probably the number two guy who is the most responsible for creating the Soviet Union. Stalin does a great job of eliminating Trotsky from the history books, but for those that know real Russian history, you need to know Trotsky. Bullet point 3, why did the Bolsheviks win the Civil War? Well, speaking of Trotsky, not only did he set up the Petrograd Soviet and the MRC, the Military Revolutionary Council, and all these other things to kill the provisional government, Trotsky also goes on to win the Russian Civil War for the Bolsheviks, the Red Army. He's the father of the Red Army, which destroys the White Army and the anti-Bolshevik forces. The last bullet point for section 2, how far was the new economic policy a success? You need to know the term war communism. War communism was the economic policy for the Bolsheviks to win the Civil War. After that, Russia's in complete ruins. There's famines, there's disease outbreaks, there's rapid devaluation of the currency. It's just a mess. So they decide to bring in this new economic policy, which is basically capitalism. It's a limited version of capitalism in order to get people to get food back into the big cities. So it was a complete disaster. And within a few years, the new economic policy manages to stabilize the situation. It is a retreat. Lenin sees it as a temporary retreat to capitalism, but in this kind of transitional period, it's an interesting idea to think what would have happened if the new economic policy would have stuck around. We shall never know, but after the new economic policy is killed by Stalin, we see the 5-year plan model, which is used for decades and decades in the Soviet Union. Speaking of Stalin, how did Stalin gain and hold on to power? Section 3. Why did Stalin, not Trotsky, emerge as Lenin's successor? Stalin was a master bureaucrat. He was, in these days, his office politics would be just off the charts. He emerged as the leader of the Soviet Union, even after Lenin wrote down in his will and testament, do not let this guy become the leader, do not put him in charge. Trotsky had way more accomplishments, father of the Red Army. He was up there equaling Lenin almost in many ways. But Stalin, who was a very minor figure, manages to use politics and his position as party secretary to stack the deck in his favor and eventually outmaneuver everyone. So playing politics, that's how Stalin became the undisputed leader of the Soviet Union, and ruthlessness, just killing, exiling, eliminating his enemies. His ruthlessness can be indicated here. Why did Stalin launch the purges? To get rid of his enemies, to consolidate power. All these famous Stalin quotes, no man, no problem, death of one man is a tragedy, death of a million men is a statistic. He had a very cold, calculating way to just murder everyone to hang on to power. So he does it a few times during his rule, but this first purge is to get rid of all the old guard, the guys that actually successfully carried out the Russian Revolution, and to put in his own version of how things should be. What methods did Stalin use to control the Soviet Union? Terror and murder. Those are the most used tools in his toolkit. He also was using foreign experts, so Americans and British and French and Germans and all these people during the Great Depression. So looking into the 5-year plan era of Stalin, 1928 after that, and then the great crash of Wall Street in 1929, we see a lot of American companies. Even though America is very opposed to communism, it doesn't stop American companies from trying to make money in the Soviet Union. So he uses foreign experts, he uses spying to steal secrets, he uses the bureaucracy of the Soviet Union and secret police, NKVD, GPRU, all these different types of apparatchiks, as they're known in Russia, these secret policemen and people that are loyal to Stalin. Anybody who was even hinted at being unloyal would be eliminated. So there's a lot of different methods. You can write a great essay for depth study coursework with this particular question. So the methods are manifold, but at the end of the day, force and violence are the main levers, using concentration camps, gulag systems, and stuff like that as well. So this is something that you can really sink your teeth into if you want to write a long essay. Lastly, in this section, how complete was Stalin's control over the Soviet Union by 1941? It's pretty complete. I would have a difficult time arguing against it is a pure totalitarian state. Religion is eliminated. All other parties are eliminated. The Communist Party of the Soviet Union itself has been purged repeatedly. The Red Army is completely under his thumb. All of the industry, there's no businessmen. He controls everything. So you can make a balanced argument for it, sure, but he had way more individual power than the other dictators of the time. Even Hitler and Mussolini and these types of people were checked by other forces, unlike Stalin. And the last one, what was the impact of Stalin's economic policies? First one was, why did Stalin introduce the 5-year plans? Stalin believed without rapid industrialization, Germany would come invade Russia and take it over. So he was quite right with the intentions of Germany. So he thought any slowdown of industrialization was treason, and that would leave the country vulnerable and the revolution vulnerable to the Germans. So looking at the 5-year plans, you should know the first one is just all heavy industry. The second one is all heavy industry in different aspects, communications and stuff like that. But it's all bullets and tanks and steel and guns and railroads and all that kind of stuff. So no consumer goods, no real care about the welfare of the Soviet citizen, just all weaponry and heavy industry. Next one, why did Stalin introduce collectivization? It was to break the independent farmer. And again, it's about control. Everything about Stalin is about control. No one else can have power but him. Collectivization was also ideologically more sound than having individual for-profit farms. So collectivization was a big target for Stalin to gain control of all the means of production and the crop for wheat and other harvests. We will see the genocide of the Ukrainian people, the Holodomor, the death by hunger in collectivization. So millions of people were killed either by bullets or by starvation. And the impact of this is becoming more and more known. The Holodomor, when I was growing up, this wasn't mentioned in my high school history class, European history. But now we see, especially with current events, the Holodomor is being recognized as a genocide by more and more countries every year. How successful were Stalin's economic changes? This is one thing you can say about Stalin. He did create a superpower. By the time of his death, the Soviet Union is a superpower, one of only two with the USA. So you can't argue with the strengthening of the country that Stalin did. What you can argue is the insane price that was paid in lives, in wasted material, just absolute chaos for many, many years in large parts of the country. So it's up to you to make a well argumented, well evidenced, and well explained essay to say, was it all worth it? Was the cost in lives and materiel and misery all worth it? Do you think Stalin actually saved the Soviet Union? That's another huge question. Could all of this suffering been avoided and still have the Soviet Union be part of the winning team on World War II? It's an interesting what if. You shouldn't get too deep into what ifs, of course, in IGCSE history, but you can give evidence saying that Stalin ignored the warnings that Hitler was going to invade. He shot all of his most competent officers in the Red Army, and he really caused havoc in the armed forces, allowing the Germans to swoop in and just have success after success in Operation Barbarossa in the early months. But another thing that you can't give Stalin credit for was general winter. The Germans were at the gates of Moscow, and they just ran out of good weather to continue their offensive. So, yeah, you can say Stalin created a superpower, no question, a country of metal, the man of steel, as he named himself. But there are other factors to say Stalin caused more harm than good. The last question is quite interesting in the section and in the overall course. How were the Soviet people affected by these changes? So was Stalin just a red czar? Was he just a communist ideology version of Nicholas II, an autocrat that just wanted things done the way that he wanted them, and there was no real gains for the Soviet people? There was only more hardship, toil in factories, toil in the field, repression. But on the other hand, you can say the Soviet people did gain a lot of power internationally and were able to safeguard their country from any further attacks by gaining a powerful military and industrial base, and also eventually gaining nuclear weapons. So again, I think maybe this is my favorite question of the whole course, the whole depth study, just the effects on the mentality, the psychology, the overall well-being of the Soviet people. The Soviet people, again, comprise of dozens and dozens of different people, not just Russians, but Ukrainians, of Belarusians, Moldovans, of the Baltic states, Central Asians, Caucasians, people in the far east of Russia. It is so many different kinds of people. How were all of these people affected by these changes? How were women affected? How were children affected? It is a fascinating question to ask.